Hey, everybody, welcome to the Jim Masters Show. We've got a very special guest joining us in just a second. The incomparable Anne Serling is making her return visit to the Jim Masters Show. You may remember she was with us a few weeks ago, and she wanted to be back in the Master Zone, which we love, Lovety Hall, because she has a fabulous book of her own that we're going to spotlight and talk about, which we're very excited about as well. And it is really, if you are a Twilight Zone fan, Night Gallery fan, Rod Serling fan, or you just love the writing of Anne Serling, because she is a prolific writer as well, and she is just a blessing to have an opportunity to chat with, I encourage you to get her book. We're going to talk about that and so much more. So let's come together and welcome our very special guest coming to us from upstate New York, snowy upstate New York, the one and only Anne Serling, back with us here on the Jim Masters Show. Anne, welcome back to the show. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jim. A pleasure to be here.
You know, I love when we chat with you because we always learn something new and another appreciation for you and your work, but also this love and devotion that you have celebrating your iconic father, wonderful playwright, television producer, screenwriter extraordinaire, the one and only Rod Serling. You know, it really is a beautiful thing, this father-daughter relationship that you've had with your father all the way up to his obvious premature passing. But you have an opportunity through your writings, through coming on a show like the Jim Masters Show, to really celebrate this loving relationship and the love you still have for your dad, and you share in such a beautiful way. And of course, your father, being who he was and still is in your heart and your mind, was a real treasure. For those watching for the first time, maybe different generations, Rod Serling, born Rodman Edward Serling, was an American screenwriter, television producer, best known for his live television dramas of the 1950s and his extraordinary anthology television series, The Twilight Zone. And he was born in Syracuse, New York. And, you know, upstate New York has lovingly found ways to celebrate him. And we're going to talk about that. There's a wonderful statue, and there's also the Memorial Foundation, all celebrating and preserving Rod Serling's incredible history and his contributions to entertainment, to television, but also to our lives through the Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, and so much more. And when you decided to embark on this opportunity to really celebrate and preserve the memory, but also to take us inside the relationship between you and your father, and the fact that your father, which you have shared on so many wonderful occasions, it was much more than just the guy we saw introing Night Gallery, Twilight Zone, and these iconic series, that he was really a warm-hearted, fun-loving guy that really cared about his family and was not necessarily the stoic person that people would assume by seeing him do what he did so well as host of the Twilight Zone. Tell us about that.
Right. My dad was nothing like people would have anticipated when they see him on the Twilight Zone and introducing that week's show, and in the dark suit and the gritted teeth and very serious. My dad was silly and funny and just a really kind, playful, wonderful father. And I actually wrote the book because I was demolished by grief when my dad died. And I found writing cathartic, as my dad and a lot of people do. And it was a way to navigate my grief. I started another book in his absence a few years after my father died, but I couldn't complete it because I hadn't even begun that journey to process just the devastation that I felt. And then I wrote, as I knew him years later, and I wrote it again to process my grief and navigate it. And I wrote it because I wanted to know more about the writer. And I wanted to set the record straight that, you know, he wasn't this dark, tortured soul that a few had said. He was exactly as I just described him.
Yes, a fun-loving person who really, again, loved his family and loved you. And we are going to be sharing that here on our show. And again, this is such an intimate, beautiful look at somebody who is not only revered, respected, but beloved. Look at this fabulous shot we have here. Tell us about this great shot of your dad and you guys.
This was taken in our home in California, and that's my older sister next to me. I'm the one with the short curly hair. So I was probably maybe 3, and my sister was 6, maybe, in that picture.
That's a really great shot. Your book, too, is really a loving look at your father, as you mentioned, as you knew him. What was that writing process like? Obviously, when he did pass, it was devastating to you and your family and a great loss to the rest of us as well. But you knew him and you knew, again, what he was like, and you wanted to share that. What was the writing process like, writing this extraordinary book? And congratulations on it, Anne.
Thank you. Well, the process was I wrote somewhat like he did, in terms of I'd get up very early in the morning and write throughout the day. It was a joy to spend every day with him and to be learning so much more about his life and his childhood. And one of the most difficult parts of writing the book was when my dad was in training camp, about to go to World War II, and my son was the same age at that point that my dad was. He was 18, my father, when he enlisted in the war. He enlisted the day after he graduated from high school. And he wanted to fight the Nazis, but he was sent to the Philippines. But reading these letters that he wrote from training camp and that his parents wrote to him, it was just agonizing, because he was asking for things like, please send me candy, send a belt, send underwear because I don't like the GI underwear. And it was like a kid at summer camp. It wasn't like, and to know what he was about to be thrust into, like all of these kids that we send off to these horrific wars, those were tough.
Yeah. Tough moments, tough times, absolutely. And he was affected deeply by the war and being a part of the military and the things he witnessed, things he saw. And he sort of changed his major too, didn't he? Language and literature, because he really wanted to write about these things and share this in the way, shapes and forms that he did, right?
Right. My dad had worked at a summer camp for kids with rheumatic fever, and he really liked working with kids. So before the war, he thought when he went to college, he'd like to teach phys ed to kids. But when he got to Antioch, he was still, they didn't have a word for PTSD. It was called shell shock. But clearly dealing with trauma. And as he said, he needed to write. He needed to get it out of his gut. He needed to get it off his chest. So he changed his major from phys ed to language and literature.
And there's a wonderful shot during that time, right?
Yeah, that's my parents at Antioch.
That's amazing. Yeah. This is a terrific shot too of him. Look at the young, I believe it's around 1941, the young Rod Serling there, huh?
That's a high school picture, right?
That is the high school picture. And here's another fabulous shot. Look at this.
Yeah. So this really speaks of the idyllic childhood that my father left behind. And he referred to it as idyllic. He was, and I don't think he was unique to this, but totally unprepared for how his life was going to change. And of course, his father died when he was overseas. And even though the war was over, my dad didn't have enough points to go home. And so he couldn't return for his father's funeral. And it was devastating for him. And I think he never really processed that grief as I didn't his. So we sort of took a parallel journey, I think, in terms of that.
Tell us about the folks that are in the photo.
I'm not sure exactly who they are, just childhood friends. And
Yeah, with him there. Yeah. He had this wonderful, like you mentioned, childhood growing up in upstate New York. But when he did go off to war, it gave him a different perspective about life and truly a deeper understanding of the human condition, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, not prepared for the horrors that he saw. A friend of his was a food crate had fallen from the sky and decapitated him when they were overseas, and I mean, he just saw horrific things.
But his time growing up in wonderful Binghamton really did also shape him as well. And he pulled from aspects of his youth growing up in the Binghamton area, as well as what he witnessed, at war, and was able to weave various things about his life and his experiences into episodes of the Twilight Zone, which was fantastic. The writing and creating of such an iconic and epic series as the Twilight Zone, as much as it was something of entertainment and something that, provided a real understanding for all of us watching it about different perspectives on how we conduct ourselves and how we treat one another and how we go about our lives. I would imagine that for him, in many ways, it was also a therapeutic, cathartic experience, sharing through the form of this young medium of television and getting it out and getting us to think about things that he was also thinking about himself, right?
Right. He told a writing class, I think this is how he phrased it, that he had a preoccupation with writing about the past. And certainly his episode, Walking Distance, is a journey that my father was taking many, many times in his mind, going back to his hometown, seeing himself as a little boy, seeing his parents, and the father in the episode telling him, are things so bad where you're from? Maybe you've just been looking behind you. Try looking ahead. And I'm sure those are the words that my dad would have loved to have heard his father say.
Exactly. What was his relationship with his parents? And from your deductions, was he like more, similar to his father or his mother? What would you say?
Well, I heard mostly about, my dad talked mostly about his father. And I vividly remember him saying to me, if only you had known your grandfather, words that I would someday couldn't imagine, but would someday have to say to my own kids. But I also know that he was very close to his mother. When I was writing the book, I met someone who had known my dad in college, and he told me that my father talked a lot about his mom as well. I knew my grandmother, but she died when I was 3. But his dad was, I think, very similar sense of humor as my dad. And just like I said, a grief that he hadn't fully reconciled and missed him throughout his life.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's nobody knows what it's like to lose a loved one, especially. It's almost like a two-part situation. I remember Lucy Arnaz, who's a friend as well, and she's been a guest on the show several times. And people, she's carved out her own life and her own experiences and her own career and family. But of course, still the daughter of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, internationally beloved and acclaimed, and everybody talks about them. And sometimes you would think, are you wanting to talk to me or the other Lucy, Lucille Ball? And yet recognizing, the contributions that they made and appreciating those contributions as well. But when her parents passed away, Desi and then Lucy, only 3 years apart, 86 and 89, there is this two-parter to the grief, right? There's your grief, losing your beloved father, who to you is dad, daddy, father. And then there is the world's grieving. There's the people in the industry, there's the super fans, there's the world at large who can't get enough of this iconic figure who's to you, you respect for his contributions and for everything he's done, but at the same time, in your heart will always be dad. How did you and how have you navigated that dual understanding of grief, where one, it's the grief personal you have with the loss, early loss of your beloved father, and then recognizing the public grief that happens and people come to you wanting to hear about your father and what was it like and what was he like. It's almost two kinds of grief that one has to deal with when their loved one is a public figure or celebrity.
It was interesting because when I wrote the book, I heard from a lot of people who really related to the grief. In their, I mean, it's universal, right? Everybody has to deal with it. But the number of people who told me that they had had tumultuous childhoods and thought of my father as their father was amazing to me. And when I wrote the book, actually before it was published, I did a talk at the Paley Center, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, she told me that her father was dying, and after hearing me read, she knew she'd be okay. And it was such a shock, Jim, to know that something that I had said, words that I said, had helped her. I couldn't even speak to her. I just hugged her. I couldn't articulate that moment, that of gratitude that I felt and sadness for what she was experiencing, but that something I'd said had helped her.
Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that beautiful that people, feel even a deeper connection in that way and they want to express it to you? That is really a beautiful thing. I'm sure you take those memories and those words deep inside as you remember your father, which again, you've lovingly done in the book. There's so many episodes, obviously, when people talk about the Twilight Zone in particular, and one of my favorite all-time series, and working in the industry, working in television and radio myself, just loving the way that the show was done and the storylines and the way the public has responded to it and continues to all these years later. But when you wrote the book, so one of the things that I think that is so beautiful about this is you do really take the time to reveal that fun-loving side of your dad, the family man behind the serious figure that the public saw hosting the Twilight Zone each week. And when your dad passed in 1975, and the world seemed to stop at that moment with shock and grief, at only 50 years old, you were 20. And it sort of, as you mentioned, it left you stunned and reeling. Here's your dad. But through talking to the friends and poring over old love letters too, which I think is extraordinary, and recounting your childhood memories, you not only navigated your profound grief, which, as you just beautifully outlined, other people can plug into with losses in their life as well, but you even gained a deeper understanding of the remarkable man, both as your father and as the dynamic writer that he was. And you're sharing this journey. You're taking us who have this version, this image of who, Rod Serling was, as far as the television guy, the writer, the screenwriter, the producer, the playwright. But you're taking us into your world, into your life in a very deep loving, personal way. Not everybody able to do that, but you do it as you share other elements of your father, who we know as the Twilight Zone guy, the Night Gallery guy, and everything else, but the man behind it all, which I think is an extraordinary, it's a gift, Anne. You're giving yourself, your family, his legacy, a gift you're giving your father, and a gift you're giving all of us, because through those personal photos and the letters, scenes of your dad's youth, service in World War II, the family time together, it's this intimate portrait of your father and daughter, that loving relationship, and a tribute to your dad, Rod Serling's legacy as a visionary, storyteller, and humanist. It really is a gift. You didn't have to do it, but I knew inside it was something that you wanted to do, and it's in your heart. But it really is a gift to all of us that you've opened it up in this way to invite us into his world and your world.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so fortunate, and I can't say this enough, to have had this man as my dad. He was magical. And the fact that I kept so many of the letters that he'd written me when I was at camp or in school, and I'm so grateful I had those letters, because what was left behind is not everybody has that, and I know what a gift. I'm repeating myself, but I can't say it enough.
It is absolutely a total gift. And, the fact that you just open up about it in the way that you do, I think is such a beautiful thing. Not everybody gets a chance to do that, but I also think that in a way that it's a gift when you see and you hear these stories, when people open their hearts to you about what your father meant and continues to mean to them, and how your father tackled really interesting topics about life and everything, religion, politics, just talked about how we got along, about our childhoods, about seeking a life that's better than the life that we're living now, or wanting to create the perfect person, or dealing with, elements of nature and the far out into the galaxy, all the different things that he sprinkled in. And there's so many elements of all of these fabulous episodes that are so true to form. No matter what decade it is we're watching the Twilight Zone in, and his writings, we can apply a particular episode to things we're living through even today. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty stunning. That the things that he wrote about are still so relevant and sadly prevalent. But I think, a lot of that, of course, is because he dealt with the human condition, and times change, but people don't. So here we are. And he would be deeply saddened initially about that, and then apoplectic.
I don't doubt. I can only imagine, what he would be writing now about just everything going on in our world and the craziness of it. Definitely, there's a lot of material for the Twilight Zone and for Night Gallery as well. Growing up in upstate New York, what's really beautiful for folks who don't know this, the area where he grew up really pays homage to him in such a beautiful way. There is, of course, the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, which you're deeply involved in, but there are things within the area that pay tribute to him and to his life, which I think is fantastic. The creation of the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation, and of course, we'll talk about the beautiful statue that was unveiled as well. Tell us about the importance of this wonderful foundation, because there might be people watching who know all about the Twilight Zone Night Gallery, and it's the usual things that they talk about, but they don't know about this fantastic foundation that really preserves everything about him.
Yeah, the foundation was actually started by some high school friends of my dad's, and his beloved teacher, Helen Foley, years ago, I think in the early 80s. Andy Pollock was the first president of the foundation. And it's just something that my dad would be so stunned by. Actually, my father would be stunned that he's even remembered and remembered so fondly. But it's a wonderful tribute to my dad, as is the statue that you referenced that was just erected this summer.
How special is that, huh? Look at that beautiful statue. And of course, with the door.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's also a program in Binghamton called The Fifth Dimension, where the fifth graders watch episodes of The Twilight Zone, and they learn about scapegoating and mob mentality and isolationism and racism. And it's a program that I think my dad would have felt was his greatest accolade, that they're learning from these shows.
Isn't that incredible? His message continues to carry through and carry on. And the Twilight Zone specifically, because I know there's so many other things that your father did. Twilight Zone, of course, the thing that people reference the most, which was an extraordinary series. It has reached, and this probably is very endearing to you as well, so many generations. Of course, the initial that were watching it on CBS, and then of course the reruns and syndication and all the different channels, and then Sci-Fi Network doing marathons, and all the different times people have had an opportunity to see it, getting the DVDs and other ways that they can have it in their house. But when you hear from younger generations who maybe are just discovering who Rod Serling was and his contributions to humanity through his art and his work and his writing and through television, it's got to be a real tingly feeling, right? It's a legacy that's going to continue forever.
And it's interesting, someone just contacted me who's having his bar mitzvah and wanted to showcase my dad in his speech about how my dad was a great humanitarian. So these are things that, or other people who tell me they became writers because of my father. And these are things that my dad, again, would be so stunned by and so humbled.
Do you have a favorite episode of, this is of course Night Gallery, but starting with a Twilight Zone, you've seen them, you know, it's really interesting. You shared, I think people would be fascinated by this story as well, that, you know, early on, more of when you were a kid, you didn't necessarily understand or realize who he was and the series that existed and all of this, because he was your dad. You're having fun. He's your dad. When's dad coming home? You know, let's go to the park, all that kind of stuff. When did it kick in, who he was, what he meant to people, and these incredible series and shows and all the product that he created?
Well, I knew from an early age that my dad was a writer, but I didn't know exactly what he was writing. And the first Twilight Zone that I saw was Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And I watched it actually with my father at our summer cottage. And I was pretty horrified and scared by that show, even though I realized later that my father didn't write that episode. It was Richard Matheson. But at one point, some mean kid on a playground asked me if I was something out of the Twilight Zone, and I didn't know what that meant. And he said, "Where does your dad get all his ideas, hanging from the ceiling?" And so I went home and I asked my father what that meant, and he explained that he wrote for an episode, or he wrote for a series. And so I think it was actually after this conversation that I saw that Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. But, you know, my dad would get stopped for autographs, but it wasn't like it is today. You know, the paparazzi it wasn't that overwhelming and terrifying. as it is, I'm sure, today.
You didn't have people digging through the garbage and all the kinds of thing, the garbage cans at the end of the street.
Not that I know of. I do remember going with my father with a friend of mine, and some guy stopping him and asking him if he'd sign his girlfriend's chest. And my dad drew the line there. No, he wasn't going to do that. So.
There has to be a line, right?
Right.
Just make it like I've done for all of you. Make it a delusion. Make it a figment of your imagination that I did sign it. I didn't, but in your mind, you can think that I did.
Right.
One of the delusions.
Right.
You know, there's this with Twilight Zone, this psychological thriller aspect of the series where it really has a way to draw you in once the episode starts and not let you go until that twisted ending happens, taking you down this particular path. Like I mentioned when you were on last time, I love the midnight sun as well. The whole time we're thinking that, you know, it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and all the different elements at play between the people involved. And then all of a sudden, it turns out they were actually moving further from the sun, and it's getting colder and colder and colder, just taking us down. And we're sort of buying into this. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, not quite, not exactly what you thought. I just think that's genius, and that's brilliant to bring you into what you think is going to be happening and how it's played out and the ways you would expect things to happen. And then all of a sudden to have that flip. There was that other one too, I mentioned to you before we went on the air, with the actress with, you know, Room for One More, Honey. And we just watched that the other night. She's in that hospital bed and she's having this dream of dropping the glass and heading towards the morgue all the time. And then that nurse comes out, that nurse that nobody else had an opportunity to see or recognize, and swings open that door, Room for One More, Honey. And then, of course, there is the ultimate situation. I don't want to give it away in case folks haven't seen that episode, but there's a tie into that Room 22 and a Flight 22. Just extraordinary, taking you down the road of how even your mind can play tricks. What is real? What is not real? That is genius.
Yeah, he was certainly unique in that way, that he could write those twist endings and catch you off guard.
Do you think he ever realized in, you know, the time that you had with him or research that you've done, you know, thus far, and we love this shot. This is a great one too. The then and the now shots. Do you think he realized what he meant to people? Do you think he realized how people really revered and respected your dad, Rod Serling? Or was he just doing what he loved doing and what he knew and what he did best? Was it, I'm going to get in there, we're going to get the team together, and we're going to, you know, create magic here? Do you think he really appreciated in the time he had, the short time he had with us, how much people really valued him?
Well, certainly he was doing what he loved best, but no, and I can say this unequivocally, that he had no idea in fact, he said that he was quoted as saying he just wanted to be remembered as a writer, but that he didn't feel his writing would stand the test of time. He said that it was momentarily adequate. So my dad would be stunned. And as I said, just greatly humbled that he is remembered and remembered so fondly.
He had an older brother too, didn't he? Robert J.
Right.
Serling?
Yeah, he had an older brother who was 7 years older.
Novelist and aviation writer as well?
Yes. Yes.
So, because your father, I know, had this interest as well, and you yourself, a wonderful writer. You grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, but then moved to Pacific Palisades in Southern California when you were 3.
Right.
And your dad,
As live television ended, well, they said all the writers moved west. So, right, we moved there when I was 3.
and your dad had an office in the house, and then one was built in the backyard so he can find some peace to write by getting away from all of the kids, but also the menagerie of dogs, cats, and
Yes.
even 2 pet rats.
Yes. Yes. And I had birds for a while too. So yeah,
That was
we were never without our animals.
But you yourself have a love of the East Coast and the change of seasons and sort of the slower pace of the smaller college town atmosphere. And you've remained, people may say, well, I bet Anne is probably in a penthouse in Manhattan. She's probably in a beach house in Miami. She's probably in a luxury, $10 million house in LA. You're in upstate New York, and I think that's beautiful. You attended college, first Alfred University, then transferred to Elmira College, where you earned your degree in elementary education with a minor in English. And then upon your graduation, you worked at school for children with special needs, and then you were a preschool teacher at Cornell University's Early Childhood Program and Cooperative Nursery School. Tell us about that side of you and your opportunity to inspire young minds in the way that you have as well so beautifully, Anne.
Well, thank you. You have certainly done your homework. I always knew that I wanted to work with children. So the opportunity to work at the Cornell Early Childhood Program was something that I was quite excited about. And then I had 2 children of my own. So.
And how do they feel about the Twilight Zone and Night Gallery and their grandfather, Rod Serling? It must have been, I would imagine they had some pretty good shows and tells at school.
They weren't really all that fazed by that, I don't think. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of good. It keeps them grounded. It is what you've done.
And I didn't actually watch many Twilight Zones when my father was alive. We always watched Night of the Meek, Christmas Eve.
Yes.
But it wasn't until after he died.
Yeah.
Right. But it wasn't until after my father died that I started to watch and more to see him than the actual episode. And there was one episode that meant a great deal to me when I saw it after he died. It was called In Praise of Pip. And in watching it, with Bill Mumy and Jack Klugman, and my dad used a routine in the show that was something he and I did. Who's your best buddy? You are, Pop. So it was a very striking kind of poignant moment that I found him in the Twilight Zone again.
And this is nice too.
Right, that's the closing narration of that episode.
That's so. Yeah, we just watched that one too a couple of nights ago. We've been on our Twilight Zone kick. We've seen all the episodes so many times, and also Night Gallery. I love the Night Gallery that had Joan Crawford in it. She was incredible in that. The picture of you on the left, the younger version, when was that taken?
I'm guessing I was maybe 7 or 8. Or you're talking about the older one? That was one of the last pictures of my dad. So that would have been in 1974.
Yeah, and the younger one, just look at the joy in his eyes. You know what I mean? The pride, the joy, and yours as well. It's fantastic. It really, really is to see. And I know people love to see these things, but to know that he really was, a loving gem of a person and really put family ahead. I have some other wonderful photos here that I would love to share. And again, I'm loving having this opportunity to share your dad in the way that you are sharing this again with your mother back at college, and then this photo as well is a beauty.
Mhm.
Both very stunning people.
Mm.
Camera loving them both. Very, very stunning. And I see elements of you, of them and you in
Mm.
you. I definitely see them. I can even see like your mother's eyes
Mm.
in you. I don't know if people have pointed that out. Here's another wonderful. This is this this is Rod Serling, folks, the
Right.
man behind the Twilight Zone.
Right.
This is a wonderful shot, and I love this one too. You had, when your mom had passed, you did a little bit of a commentary on that as well, which was,
Mhm.
what was, we're celebrating you and celebrating your dad, but what was your mom, Carol, like?
My mom was very serious, very bright, um, kind of the opposite of my dad. She was the disciplinarian. My father was the easy parent, the fun parent. Um,
It usually works that way a lot, doesn't it? There's
I
one
think
that's
so.
sort of,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, right, exactly. One is the one that makes sure that everything is still, the train is still on the track in certain ways. And okay, we got to get this, and the kids got to get in the car, and they got to go to school, and and then more of the jovial time is with the other parent. In this case, your father as well. I
Yeah.
love this shot that you sent. This is so fabulous. Tell us about this one.
This was our dog Michael, um, who was still alive actually for a couple years after my dad died. But I just thought of something when you asked about my mother. She used to say to me, "Stop laughing at your father. You're just encouraging him." I mean, she was joking, but
Was
it was.
joking, but yeah, that the razzing husband wife thing, right? Exactly. It's
No,
that's
people were very surprised to learn that my dad did probably the best gorilla imitation one could imagine, as is in almost every home movie. He had a fabulous singing voice. He would belt out Sinatra uh, all throughout the house, Tony Bennett. Um, and the picture you saw, that was my lampshade on his head. He would just sort of disappear and reappear in costume. This is the playful dad, the fun, silly dad.
your father, my father, very, very similar. My father grew up in New York City, and Irish, English, and just a witty, funny, quick sense of humor. And same thing when we were kids. Oh boy, I when we were going to bed, I would be getting piggyback rides to bed, or he would lift my legs and I would be like a wheelbarrow going down the hall to bed. And he would come into the room when we were kids, go in my room, then my sister's room, and he would have two fists like this at the end of the bed. And we would have to select, there would be something, a little piece of candy or something in the hand. Which hand had the little treat? And it was always a little spearmint certs. It was always a spearmint certs. And we would always, and it was a thing. There was just these routines, these things. My father, even, if it was a night where my mother was out, with friends or what have you, or she would play bingo with friends or go to an event through work. She worked before retiring for 34 years with Estee Lauder in New York. So there would be an event like a meeting or something. My father, on a Saturday night, we would do this. This was cool. Turn all the lights off in the house. Have the stereo. We had one of those big wood furniture stereos. And we would have all these records playing. They were his, LPs playing of everything and whatever he had, Percy Faith, Ray Conniff, Henry Mancini, all the different singers, John Gary and whoever, and some of our records. And all the lights would be off in the house. And we would play Frankenstein. Because my father, 6'1.5", and we were kids, Frankenstein. And he would have to go through the house to try to find us. And we would hide inside the toy chests with the lid down. In the den, we had toy chests, the big, when kids had big toy chests and you go in and all the toys are in there. We would hide, under couches and deep into closets. And then we did an outdoor version in our backyard. This is out east on Long Island. Where the neighbor kids came over. It was in the evening. And we had a swimming pool as well. And it would be the same thing. It would be hiding in the tree, behind the shrub, around the filter for the swimming pool. And he would just very happy-go-lucky and very, and my father had, like your father, an interesting take on war and humanity, not in favor of any of that war or any of that stuff, because he was scheduled to go on a boat from New York City that was leaving to go to Korea for the Korean War. And when they did the physical exam that they do, of course, before you go, the doctor said, James Masters, you're not going anywhere. And he says, huh? He says, you're not going anywhere. You have walking pneumonia.
Oh my God.
You're going in a hospital bed right now. So my father had to go in because he didn't even know he had it. Walking pneumonia. Sometimes you don't even know you have that. So he's in the hospital bed and he learns that the boat that left with all of the folks on there was blown up in Korea.
Oh my God.
It's like a Twilight Zone. It's almost like a Twilight Zone episode. He's getting ready. That's when they had the draft. So he was getting ready and was prepared. And then there was this walking pneumonia situation. They said, you're going into the hospital till that clears up. The boat's leaving. It's like that, room for one more honey thing. The boat leaves. Everybody's gone on the boat. He ends up not positioned in Korea. He ended up sent to Trieste, Italy, because there's a base there within the army, which was obviously a far different, much better assignment for him. But he has always said, if there's any time to get walking pneumonia, that would be the time to have it. But, making humor out of reality, getting us to think about reality. And we've always watched the Twilight Zone and all of these shows, and just a real gift. Also, it never gets talked about to the same level as the Twilight Zone, but there was, of course, Night Gallery. Tell us about Night Gallery and what you've learned about Night Gallery, which again has a whole other set of fans who enjoy Night Gallery as well. And that from time to time has been seen on television as well, and certain nostalgic channels and things of that nature. But what did you feel about Night Gallery as well, which was really an interesting series too?
It was. My dad had great hopes for Night Gallery. Unfortunately, he did not have creative control, as he did with the Twilight Zone. And I think it was the Dick Cavett show. He described it ultimately as a dance through a cemetery or something. He was just not happy with it at all. And I vividly remember my dad talking about, I think it was the producer, Jack Laird, and just this rage he felt, that they just had completely different visions of what that show was going to be. My dad, again, he wanted to write meaningful scripts, and they had these silly little things in it. But that said, and it's been, people have also said this, that some of his best writing was done in several of the scripts of the Night Gallery. The one that I particularly loved was they're tearing down Tim Riley's bar which is very similar to Walking Distance, a guy that goes back in time. And it's a beautiful, just a lovely script. So.
That is a terrific one. Yeah, it's an interesting series. And of course, there's been many different versions of the Twilight Zone, colorized movies, updated series, things of that nature as well. How do you feel about those later? To me, the original black and white with the music, the time period, those character actors that we recognize in later works or earlier works in other series they went on to be in, like Billy Mooney, Lost in Space, Jack Klugman, The Odd Couple, Quincy, so many other things. So many fabulous, Elizabeth Montgomery, so many amazing people that have come through Twilight Zone. How have you felt about the later versions, whether it's movies or series, of the Twilight Zone itself?
Well, I think the old producer of Twilight Zone, Buck Houghton, said it best. A key element was missing, and that was Rod Serling. I think, like so many shows, you can't redo them. That said, I didn't see the first two remakes, so I can't fairly speak of those. But I think I would probably not have been a great fan simply because of my personal feelings that I felt it was my dad's show. So that may be unfair, but
I understand. It makes sense. Yeah, he really was the touch. He really was the glue and the feeling and the vibe, and the fact that it's black and white and the shadowing, like we just watched again, Masks, and then we watched the episode with the beautiful woman wrapped in the gauze, and she was considered ugly. And I showed it actually to a younger friend. I've been actually showing a buddy of mine several of the episodes he hasn't seen yet because he's younger, a colleague of mine, a television colleague, and he's just blown away by it all. He's just absolutely wrapped up in these episodes. And when I showed him Masks, he's like, oh my God, that is so true, how the mask represents the real personality and lack of heart and soul of these people. You can almost, think of people in your world who you would like to create a mask for.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, a couple of people at least, like, boy, that would be, so appropriate for that person. Yeah, and it's really, I can't say enough about it. I know you've heard it a million times from so many people, but he really an extraordinary person. And I think he would be tickled probably, and maybe even a little surprised that people think about him in the way that they do. And with his recent 100th birthday, which is so hard to believe, the celebration of it, the honoring of it, the foundation, the statue, people talking about it, can't get enough of it. The stations still airing it all these years later, and the fanfare over him and his work. He would be tickled by that now, wouldn't he?
He would be, and so pleased with, for instance, Mark Dewitziak's book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in the Twilight Zone. I may have butchered that title. Mark Zakri's book, and Arlen Schumerth. He just would be so surprised.
He would be tickled by all of it. There's the back of your book too, as well. When you came up with the title for the book, were there several different thoughts, titles, previous to that name that you settled with? And for folks who are maybe seeing this version, this is an updated version that Anne did, and added even more wonderful things. You may already have this copy, everybody, but definitely get the updated version because this is the first version, but the updated version, tell us about some of the extra little goodies that you sprinkled into the updated version, Anne.
Yeah, there's more photos, more personal stories, other people that I had spoken to, memories that I wanted to include. The original title, when I started the book decades ago, the one that I told you I couldn't complete, that one was called In His Absence. So I changed
And was
it.
that going to be different than what the resulting book was, or it was just a title difference?
I think, Jim, I didn't know where it was going. I just needed to write my father back in the world, I think is essentially what I was doing.
What a fantastic way. I've never heard it put that way. I love that.
Mm.
I wanted to write my father back in the world. That's a that's amazing. That's beautiful, Anne. That
Mm.
really is. And you know, as a prolific writer yourself, you've also dabbled in the world of poetry too, right?
Yes, I wrote a lot of poetry when I was younger, and I would share it with my dad. And if he liked it, he would tell me and talk about it for days. If he didn't like it, I would know immediately because he would declare it interesting. So, right.
Cognizant of positive reinforcement
Yeah,
and
right,
giving you an opportunity to say, well, he didn't hate it, so that's a good thing.
right. He
But
found it interesting.
that was very
Right.
interesting, young lady. Yeah. That's I love this shot too, Anne. That is so beautiful.
That was at our summer cottage.
Mm. I I bet you can remember it and probably even feel his arms around you, the
Yeah.
loving arms of of family. You know, there's several episodes or a couple at least of the Twilight Zone where they take place in suburban neighborhoods, of course, you know, Nightmare Elm Street and all the monsters are coming. And we just watched the one where the neighbor had the dinner party and then they had the bomb shelter in their house, but the neighbors didn't have it. And then there was this false alarm and they go into the bomb shelter and all the neighbors come in, let us in, let us in. And we can't, we have no room. And I don't want to give it all away, but just a fascinating look at how humanity is under pressure, how we react when there's an emergency, and how we sometimes don't all come together, which we see in everyday life now,
Mhm.
how we tear each other apart. We become animals. We will do anything and take bread out of your mouth, whatever it is, as opposed to splitting the bread with somebody. And it's a real understanding of how people treat one another. These episodes are truly life lessons, aren't they, Anne?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why the fifth graders are studying these in that program I mentioned, the fifth dimension.
I think that is so cool.
My dad was quoted as saying once that our salvation is in our ability to love, and in fact I wrote it down somewhere. He said our salvation is our capacity for a human warmth and love. And I think that's an important message to remember now when, as you said, we're so polarized and so angry and scared.
Yeah, like you and I were talking before we went on together, we were talking about how so many things that are going on in our daily lives in our world now. There's an episode of the Twilight Zone for basically all of it. And he said it like if your father was here now, which he is in spirit, but if he was in the flesh, he would be saying, I told you so. I
Mhm.
let you know. I warned you. It's in episode this. And if you watch episode that, and if you rewatch that one, I sort of told you what can happen when there's certain conditions and certain environments and certain um, people and thoughts process, and it can all be to serve man. I mean, right there is a perfect example of one. And it's just fascinating. And again, can't say enough about any of it. And I encourage folks also to check out the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. I believe, and maybe it was Mark, because Mark was a guest with you here on the show when we were talking about his book, rodserling.com for the foundation. And of course, anneserling.com to learn about all the wonderful things that Anne is doing. And we've been showing this during the show. But I believe that there is something wonderful that is coming up in, I think, October with the foundation, a gathering or celebration.
Sterling Fest is going to be in September, and I don't have the dates right in my head. I'll let you know. I can't remember.
Probably if they go to rodserling.com, it's going to be on there, and
right.
Have it on your site as well. Do you?
It is September.
It is September. That's right. Yes, it is, because it's around my birthday time. It is September. I remember and it's Binghamton.
Yes.
It's in Binghamton, New York, folks. And September in the northeastern United States, September and October are beautiful with the fall foliage. And, you can even do a whole thing. You can go to Binghamton to this event, Sterling Fest at the foundation. You can also visit the foundation. Then you can go up further and you can take a look at the Lucy Desi Museum, and you can go to Cooperstown, the Baseball Museum, and then there's the Comedy Museum. There's a lot of cool things in that area that celebrate the people who came from the area, which I think is wonderful. I bet people wonder this. Does Anne Serling get people coming up to her in the supermarket if they realize who you are and say, I loved this episode. I loved your dad. Oh my God. Do you get that from time to time?
Well, not people that recognize me that way, but if I'm at events, that people will always tell me that they loved my father, and they're so respectful, and the kindness, literally the kindness of strangers, right? It's touching.
It really is. And again, you shared with us some beautiful things here. Tell us about this one.
That picture was taken on vacation. We were in Palm Springs.
Do you get to travel a lot? Are there Twilight Zone or Rod Serling events that you go to? Or I'm sure you're probably invited to a lot of different things celebrating your father over the years too.
Yeah, I've been to probably 30 some. I was just in Fredericksburg at the University of Mary Washington. I did a presentation there. I'll be in, I think it's called Monsterama in August.
Oh, that's cool.
In Georgia.
You do get a chance to go to these events where all the fans are. You sent us this. This is amazing. Tell us about this one, Anne.
This was my dad's birthday. I'm not sure who made the cake, but it certainly was not a bought cake, right?
Right, exactly. He was a good-looking guy too. He definitely had a face for, even though he was a writer and had all this behind-the-scenes production experience and phenomenal writing experience, he had an on-camera presence too, which was terrific.
Yeah, you can see the smile in that picture.
Right, a real genuine. See, now when I watched the series, and I know you've had a lot of people incorrectly say that they thought he was very stoic and very serious, and exactly like the image that was on the Twilight Zone, or maybe a little bit of Night Gallery, and you've had to say and desired sharing that was just a persona for the series, but off camera, he was this loving, playful person. He was expert at what he did, serious about what he did for his work and all, but off camera and off set, he was a warm and loving person. And your dad, and I think that makes people feel good that there was this other side, and that what you see on camera, is that one image which was so perfect for the series. And when I watched the series, I'm one of the folks who never thought Rod Serling was this stoic, serious, probably no sense of humor type of person. I see, and maybe studying psychology and other things, or maybe just working in this industry, TV and all, I saw the playful side in him. I saw that even as he delivered these lines, there was something in his eyes, there was something there that I noticed, that I said, I bet off camera, he's really a sweetheart of a guy. You can just tell, because
Right.
even the fact that he wanted to tell these stories, you have to have a heart and a soul to be able to reach us in the ways that he had. So I never bought into that, oh, well, Rod Serling must have been this very, very straightforward person only, and he was that way with his family and his friends and his relatives. I never got that. I still saw the human side of him.
Mhm.
And sometimes he was playful on those episodes too.
Yeah, he could be funny in those. It's interesting. I was recently reading his application when he applied to Antioch College, and he described himself as a rabid extrovert. And I thought that was funny. But there was that serious side too. I knew from a very young age that having a son is beating on my face here.
That's
Um,
his spirit.
yeah, I'll look at it like that. Yeah. Um, I knew from a very early age that he was furious about prejudice and racism and anti-Semitism, and he practiced what he preached.
Yes, he did. He did. And that's the thing that is so honest about him and about the stories told on the Twilight Zone and Night Gallery and so much more. Do you think that he would have just continued and probably have maybe created more series, more movies? What were some other interests that he had beyond what people know him for the most?
Well, my dad was, and I know this, he was very much looking forward to the second half of his life. He wanted to write a Broadway play. He wanted to write a novel. Um, I think those are two things that you would have seen had they been successful.
The fact again that you're telling the stories and you're doing it in a way that is so loving, and truly is a gift to all of us. Do you talk to your dad? Do you take time
Um,
and say, "Hey, Dad, you did good"? And do you have those moments where you're sharing your time with your dad, even
I,
now?
I I don't think that there's a day that my dad doesn't float across my mind. Um, Sometimes it's like help. Um,
Yeah. Yep. He would love knowing that, and I know he knows that. And any of us who've ever lost anybody dear in our lives, who really, and I guess even though he wasn't here as long as any of us would have hoped, especially you and your family, um, do you find comfort in, like, for example, one of my friends, his mother was a very famous singer from the 60s, and a very famous group and very famous singer. And she passed away 3 years ago. And I asked him, I said, are you're sad, of course, you lost your mother because she's your mother to you, but her music is everywhere. Her music's even being used in commercials today. There's movies, there's all these things. There's references to your mother, all the show, Ed Sullivan's show she was on, all these things. Does that comfort you? At first, for him, he couldn't watch any of it. He couldn't watch the news coverage announcing her passing. He
mhm.
couldn't go back on, YouTube or anything else and look at the videos of her in the group singing and the interviews and all these things. He couldn't go running to that. I tend to do that. When a loved one passes, I pull out the photos, we go through everything. I'll make a tribute video, I'll do the eulogies. I have to keep them here with us and for as long as I can in that certain way. He was the opposite. He couldn't look at any of it. Now he's starting to slowly look at it, and he appreciates all of it. But the pain was so strong that it was hard for him to dive in deep. How about for you? I would imagine if you flip through the dial and there's Dad on the Twilight Zone or any other references to your father in society around you, is it like a warm blanket for you? Does it comfort you?
Well, I just feel so fortunate that, you know, I can find him in all these places. I can find him on television still. I can find him in other people's stories about what he meant to them or how they touched their lives. You know, there was a period where I would look through photograph albums, and then the fact that the pictures would stop, that was agonizing, needless to say. But the episode that I was talking about in Praise of Pip, to find the routine that he and I did, that he put in this Twilight Zone, I thought, how special is that? How lucky am I to have this? You know, not everybody does. And you know, as I was saying before, people that would tell me they had terrible childhoods, but they would find my father and think of him as their dad, and or that the Twilight Zone was something that they did as a family that would pull them together for those 30 minutes. There was a guy who was a conscientious protester. I think that's the phrase. What is it?
Like an activist?
Objector. And he was going to be drafted into Vietnam, and he hid out in a church basement, and he said that my father saved his life, thinking about words that my dad would say, that, you know, you're going to be okay. I have not told that story nearly as beautifully as he did, but it's very touching. Conscientious objector is really
conscientious objector. Yeah. How beautiful that story is. And to know that, huh? The impact that he had on that person's life.
Absolutely.
And the decisions he's made probably going forward in his life as a result of that is
and a beautiful writer in his own right too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are countless stories. I mean, I've even pointed people to an episode or two, and they're struggling with something at their work or whatever. I say, go watch this episode of Twilight Zone and see how that was handled. See how, you know, to deal with your boss, or to deal with the person that doesn't like any noise in society, or doesn't want to be around all the machines, you know, these things. It's, you know, or falls in love with the computer Agnes, whatever it is. You know, watch an episode or two and you'll understand it. It'll break down easier for you to swallow. Extraordinary, again, the wonderful opportunity to go back in time and celebrate you, Anne, as much as your father, because you're doing, as I mentioned, a beautiful thing, keeping his image, his life, his legacy alive through everything that he's done. And again, he's just one of those iconic figures in American history that we miss dearly, like you do. And I encourage folks to definitely get the book, folks, even if you have the other version. If you're a real aficionado, or you want to learn more, maybe you've heard of Twilight Zone Night Gallery and you're just learning about who Rod Serling is. Here is a wonderful take on this extraordinary figure in our lives through the eyes and heart and soul of his daughter, Anne. As I knew him, my dad, Rod Serling. And written by Anne, lovingly tribute to her father. And Again, if you want to learn more, it's available at Amazon, and all books are sold. Barnes and Noble, Amazon has got it sitting there for you. You can learn more about Anne, of course, at anneserling.com. She has a wonderful website, Rod Serling, rodserling.com. The Rod Serling Memorial Foundation is a fantastic, if you can't get enough Rod Serling and just a tribute to him, make your way upstate New York and peruse and enjoy. Do you think you're going to be there at the event in September, Anne?
I am, and the dates came back, the September 19th through the 21st. So,
I like the way your father, his spirit whispered it in the ear, and like you said, it came back. I love that. Yeah. So go to rodserling.com and you can learn more about this really terrific event. There's the book, folks.
There are two other books, Nick Parisi's book too, and Amy Boyles-Johnson. Her book is Unknown Serling.
Isn't that cool? Now, you must be fascinating reading other people's books about your father.
Yeah, and my dad, like I said, would just get a kick out of this. The people take the time to write about him.
We don't want to give the whole book away because it's a must read and a great gift for somebody. But what would be one thing maybe about your dad that you loved about him that maybe would surprise us?
Well, just that he was silly. The greatest example is the one you showed, where he would disappear and reappear with the lampshade on his head. We weren't allowed to watch TV during the week. This was my mom's rule. But my dad would let me sneak shows with him, and we would constantly watch the Flintstones together. He loved it.
Now, isn't that cool, everybody? Rod Serling's watching the Flintstones with his child. I bet you didn't expect that, right? Yabba dabba doo. That's a great shot of him there too, huh?
Right.
Yeah, he's a good-looking guy. I tell you, he could have been in movies too. I don't doubt any of that.
He looked like his mother.
So he resembled his mother then. It's a great shot. And then again, you talked about your mother too, and their relationship and the yin and yang of life and what it all means. And there's the station wagon. We can see the taillight of the station wagon, right?
Right.
Looked like it was either a Mercury or a Ford. I can tell back from
I couldn't tell you.
from the 70s. Really great stuff. Really, really love this trip down, not just memory lane and remembering this iconic figure, but you being so wonderful, delightful. And that's why I wanted to have you back when we chatted last time, because you were so endearing then, and you are a very endearing, loving soul, Anne Serling. And it's a blessing having an opportunity to chat with you. And you are welcome back here anytime. Anything that you're doing, whether we're celebrating your father, but even celebrating the wonderful work that you do as well. And this was a delight. And I hope that you'll come back and see us again. We'll keep that porch light on for you, and you are welcome at any time. And it's right around my birthday time as well. So I'm going to make sure I'm there and come up to Binghamton, New York in September for that event. And hopefully we'll see you there, and it'll be a pleasure, Anne. Thank you so much, Jim, and happy travels. Happy travels. That's right. We're going to be going all over for the television work. A blessing having you here. And I hope you enjoyed the time with me as much as I have with you, Anne. I have. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. You take care. Continued blessings. And let's stay in touch. And we'll see you again soon, okay? Thank you. Be well. Bye-bye. You too. The incomparable Anne Serling joining us here for a wonderful, in-depth, extended conversation. She was with us previously, but we wanted to bring her back so we can really focus on her updated book. I told her, you're welcome back so we can focus on the book. There's the back of the book as well, available at Amazon. It was a delight to have her here on the show. She's a wonderful poet, writer, author herself. And for those of you who are Rod Serling fans, Twilight Zone fans, Night Gallery fans, or you just love television, you love writing, you love science fiction, you love thriller, you love psychology, whatever it is, I encourage you to join us as we celebrate Anne and we celebrate her daddy, Rod Serling, on this episode of the Jim Masters Show. So many episodes of Twilight Zone. Of course, we've talked about Twilight Zone in its various forms several times here on the Jim Masters Show series, but to have the opportunity to discuss it further with his incredible daughter, really something special. And the fact that she's honoring her father continually in the way that she does, and she, answers any questions, and she's very affable, and she just is special. And so is that loving relationship, as any daughter would have, hopefully, if they're blessed like Anne has been, to have the loving relationship with her dad in the way that she has, and to be able to talk about it, in a way and said, you know what? He was really a terrific person. This episode we just watched, 22, The Morgue, we just watched it like 2 nights ago. Really wonderful stuff here. And again, real quick, just want to mention that there is the Memorial Foundation up in upstate New York, and I encourage you to go check it out and take a look at all these wonderful things. The statue, which is pretty recent, and it's absolutely stunning. It's a work of art. That is Rod Serling, of course. A little bit of like the open to the series, and there's this memorial as well, and really, really special. And make sure you check that out too. Go to rodserling.com to learn more about the Rod Serling Memorial Foundation. That's a little bit of the inside of it as well. This was a fantastic episode as we've taken you into the Master Zone and the Twilight Zone and into the life of Rod Serling as she knew him and loved him. And that was really, really a treat. One more time, let's show that book because it is a masterpiece. And if you have the first version, get the updated one because there's a lot more in there that she has shared. Again, it's at Amazon and places where you get the books, but you can also check out anneserling.com. And one more time, rodserling.com. This is your host, Jim Masters, and loving this book, encouraging you to get it. Wonderful taking a look at Rod Serling behind the scenes, the man behind the show and everything else through the eyes of his loving daughter. Come see us again if you enjoyed this episode of the Jim Masters Show series. We love having you here. There are hundreds of episodes with celebrity guests and special friends who stop by our series and enjoy what we do here. And if you do, and you enjoyed this episode, maybe you learned something or you're celebrating something with us, give this episode a thumbs up, share this episode on your social media, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, where all the episodes are. This episode archived. So if you joined us late or you'd like to see it again, you can see it again on the YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, and leave a comment. Drop a comment below in the section. We love when we hear from our viewers. It means the world to us. I'm a very interactive host, so let us know what you enjoy about our series and what are some of your favorite Rod Serling memories, Twilight Zone memories, Night Gallery memories, or anything else. Come see us again. For all of us here, this is your host, Jim Masters, thanking you for your time this time. Till next time, a reminder too, you can follow us on social media at Instagram, X, and Facebook at Jim Masters TV. And if this was your first time watching, welcome to Levity Hall and the Jim Masters Show series. A pleasure to have you here. Don't keep it a secret. Tell the world in and out of the Twilight Zone about our series. We love having you here. All right. We'll see you again soon. Be well, everybody. Take care and cheers.